Have you ever heard the sound of a silenced pistol echoing in a concrete stairwell at 1 a.m. in St. Petersburg? No? Most people haven't, and that's the point. By the time the echo fades, the killer is already gone. The body is cooling, and the city sleeps on. But on the night of March 30th, 1994, one sound changed everything. That sound was death coming for Vyacheslav Dmitriev, and no one saw it coming. He was found in a pool of blood at the entrance of an elevator on Tipanova Street. Young, expensively dressed, slumped on the tiles like a man who'd simply fallen asleep mid-stride. But his body told a different story. Multiple shots to the chest. 2 final, precise shots to the head. The calling card of a professional. The neighbors knew him only as the quiet man from apartment 347, always arriving in one of his many sleek foreign cars. Always alone. They assumed he was just another rich businessman, and in post-Soviet Russia, that meant trouble. When police arrived, there was no murder weapon, no fingerprints, no signs of a struggle, only bullet casings and blood. But something was off. Veteran investigators noticed it immediately. Most contract killers left the weapon behind, as a message. Not this time. It was as if the killer wanted to confuse them, wanted them chasing ghosts. There were no suspicious people seen near the building. No arguments, no shouting, nothing. But one detail stood out. The locks on the attic doors had been broken. Not just in Dmitriev's building, but also in the one across the street. It was a route of escape. The killer had used the rooftops to disappear. The case landed on the desk of Boris Smirnov, a young investigator at the Moscow District Prosecutor's Office. On paper, it looked like another dead end. High-level victim, no leads, no witnesses. A classic hit. But something about it didn't sit right with Smirnov. There were too many contradictions. Too many questions. He didn't know it yet, but this case would consume years of his life and nearly cost him everything. Smirnov started with the basics. Who was Vyacheslav Dmitriev? At first glance, his company, a small firm called Vikord, seemed harmless. Middleman services, a bit of logistics, nothing flashy. But when detectives pulled the financials, the illusion shattered. Dmitriev wasn't small-time. He owned over a dozen apartments scattered across the city, more than 40 luxury vehicles, and his company? It was a front. Behind Vikord was a sprawling empire. Food distribution, oil pipelines, gas stations. Quiet, massive, hidden in plain sight. But here's what made it truly strange. Dmitriev had no visible ties to organized crime. None. In 1990s Russia, that was like swimming with sharks and never getting bitten. Almost impossible, especially when you're sitting on millions. Smirnov dug deeper. He interviewed family, friends, former classmates. Everyone described the same man, honest, generous, and completely secretive. No one really knew him, not his past, not his plans. Even during his time at the Marine Academy, instructors had no idea he was already a successful businessman. 2 years into his studies, he dropped out, quietly walking away from a naval career to focus on money. Meanwhile, forensic reports from the crime lab revealed more anomalies. The bullets matched those from a TT pistol, a favorite among contract killers. But the velocity and impact were off. Too powerful, too precise. Something wasn't right. Even the casing markings didn't match any known TT model. Experts suspected the weapon had been modified or homemade, but that didn't fit the profile of a pro. Professional killers don't use experimental gear. So now Smirnov had 2 mysteries. Who killed Dmitriev, and why did they do it so strangely? The answer, he hoped, lay in Dmitriev's business dealings. Smirnov's team sent out requests to dozens of companies Dmitriev had worked with. The paper trail was long, obscured, intentionally messy. But they uncovered 2 major projects, a chain of gas stations in Moscow and, far more significant, a joint venture with a major German auto manufacturer to build the largest car dealership center in Russia. The initial investment? 200 million Deutsche Marks. That changed everything. projects of that scale didn't go unnoticed by the criminal world. If Dmitriev had been dealing in Moscow, he'd crossed into territory controlled by powerful Caucasian crime syndicates. The same ones that ran most of the oil and gas infrastructure in the capital. Smirnov sent an undercover agent into the underworld, targeting anyone who might have had a connection to Dmitriev. Days turned into weeks. Then, finally, a name surfaced. Saeed, a known Moscow-based gang leader from the Caucasus region. He'd been seen asking questions about a businessman named Slava in early 1994. Slava was short for Vyacheslav. The timeline matched, so did the location. Saeed had power, reputation, and a reason. If Dmitriev was trying to build gas stations in Moscow, he would have been seen as either a partner or a threat. And Dmitriev didn't partner with criminals. He'd made that clear in his life. So maybe Saeed had made a choice for him. Still, there were no hard links, just whispers. Smirnov needed more. That's when another name appeared, Alexander Ryazanov, a seemingly harmless man, director of a youth martial arts club called Rovesnik. But Ryazanov was close to Dmitriev, too close. He traveled with him to Moscow. He handled negotiations. And now, after the murder, he was benefiting, quietly taking over parts of Vikord's assets. Then came the break. An informant from inside Saeed's circle revealed that Ryazanov had met with Saeed, not just once, but several times. And he wasn't the only one. One of Ryazanov's club associates, Rodion Ismedliayev, had recently been gifted a Mercedes from Dmitriev's collection. That alone raised eyebrows. But when investigators discovered that Ismedliayev was a former Afghan war sniper, trained in covert assassination techniques, the picture darkened. Now there was motive. There was opportunity. There was skill. But there were still no fingerprints, no weapons, no confessions. Until another break came, by accident. In late 1995, police arrested a small gang of arms dealers. One of them, facing a long sentence, flipped. He mentioned that back in 1994, his associate, a man named Sadetsky, had been commissioned to find a special pistol. High precision, impossible to trace. It sounded like the murder weapon. Sadetsky was brought in, but as soon as they asked about the gun, he shut down, terrified, shaking, silent. Smirnov knew fear when he saw it, and this wasn't fear of prison. This was fear of someone far more dangerous. Another name was now in play, a man known only as Cyborg, Sadetsky's right-hand man. But there were no records, no arrests, just a whisper of a nickname. Then came the stroke of luck every case needs. A woman mentioned she once dated a man nicknamed Cyborg. His real name? Lukin. His address? Still active. Surveillance began immediately, and that's when the final piece snapped into place. Cyborg was seen meeting with Saeed, escorting him across St. Petersburg, taking him to Vikord's office, taking him to Ryazanov. Shortly after, Saeed's name appeared on Vikord's board of directors, along with his close associates. Ryazanov, too, was now a majority shareholder. And then came the most chilling revelation. The sniper, Ismedliayev, had been gifted a car by Dmitriev, a thank you or payment for silence. Investigators learned he'd served in a special forces sniper unit in Afghanistan. He was decorated, deadly, and loyal to Ryazanov. The case was finally taking shape, but it still needed a smoking gun, and Smirnov had a hunch where to find it. The deeper Smirnov went, the less the case looked like a simple contract killing. This was a machine, a quiet, calculated structure built not on rage, but on silence. And somewhere inside that silence, a witness still lived. He started combing through phone records, not just Dmitriev's, but the people around him. Ryazanov, Ismedliayev, Saeed. Hundreds of calls. Patterns emerged. Some numbers repeated across all three men. One in particular stood out. a landline registered to a warehouse on the southern edge of St. Petersburg in the Kupchino district. Smirnov visited the site under pretense of an inspection. The warehouse was nearly empty. The owner, a man named Gleb Terekhov, claimed he rented it out to a sports club. No documentation, no names, just cash and silence. But Smirnov noticed a few odd things: reinforced walls, marks on the floor that looked like the recoil tracks of gun tripods, and in a dusty side office, a single photograph taped to the underside of a desk drawer. It showed a group of men in camouflage, young, smiling. Among them, Ismedliaev, and behind him, half-concealed, a familiar face. Lukin, the cyborg. This was no sports club. This was a staging ground. When Smirnov brought this to his superiors, they stalled, told him to stand down, focus on newer cases. The trail was cold, they said. But Smirnov wasn't cold. He was burning. Something in his gut told him he was close. He decided to take a risk. Through a contact in the telecom bureau, he had a recorder installed on Lukin's line. Legal? Maybe, but necessary. And on the second day, the recorder caught something. A voice. Nervous. Russian, but with a clear southern accent. He's asking too many questions. What if he finds the photo? Another voice. Flat, emotionless. Then we changed the locks. Smirnov now knew Lukin was still active. And someone else, someone close to the original crime, was afraid. That was pressure. And pressure makes people crack. He doubled down. Interviewed retired officers from the Afghan war who had trained snipers like Ismedliaev. One name came up again and again: Colonel Artyom Kozin, a ghost of the Soviet military, no longer in service, living in a dacha near Luga. Smirnov drove out in the dead of night. The house was quiet, too quiet. As he approached, he saw movement inside. A figure slumped near the fireplace, shot twice. Execution style. Kozin was dead. The message was clear: stop digging. But the killer had made a mistake. In his panic, he'd left something behind. A glass, partial fingerprint, enough for a match. It was Lukin. Now Smirnov had a corpse, a print, and a motive. Kozin had trained Ismedliaev. He likely knew the truth about the Dmitriev hit. And someone had silenced him. Someone who was now within reach. But Smirnov needed more than prints. He needed testimony. That came from an unexpected place. A young woman named Elvira stepped forward. A former assistant at Vikord. She had seen things. Quiet exchanges between Ryazanov and foreign men. Envelopes. Late-night meetings in a back office. One night she overheard a conversation. After this is done, we own it all. And Slava, he won't be a problem anymore. She hadn't come forward earlier out of fear. But now, with Kozin's death on the news, she realized no one was safe. Not even the old. Her statement tied Ryazanov directly to the conspiracy. It confirmed that Dmitriev had been isolated, targeted, executed. And the ones who took his place? They weren't businessmen. They were predators. Smirnov now prepared his report for prosecution. Over 700 pages of evidence, photos, tapes, witness testimony, all leading to one conclusion: a coordinated assassination for financial control, ordered by Ryazanov, executed by Lukin, with support from Saeed's network. He sent it to the district office, then waited. 3 days. No reply. On the 4th day, he was told the case had been transferred, reassigned to a federal division. No explanation, no warning. Then came the final insult. His recorder was removed. The informants went silent. Elvira disappeared. And the original file, marked unsubstantiated. Smirnov resigned 2 weeks later. His desk was cleared in 20 minutes. No one thanked him. No one said goodbye. But he kept one thing: the photo from the warehouse. He kept it in his wallet, folded, faded, just in case someone ever asked again what happened to Vyacheslav Dmitriev, because the truth is, justice never came. Only the silence did. It wasn't just about murder. It was extraction, wealth, contacts, documents. Vikord wasn't just a business. It was a vault, and Saeed had come to empty it. That led Smirnov to the archives. He spent nights combing through shell company registrations. He found 3 firms all tied to Vikord, one in Cyprus, one in Chechnya, one in the Virgin Islands. They had one thing in common. Each had been signed over by someone using Dmitriev's signature after his death. Forgery, fraud, international laundering, and the trail kept circling back to one name, Ryazanov. It turned out Ryazanov was living 2 lives. Publicly, he was a quiet businessman, now running a non-profit that helped troubled youth, a perfect redemption arc. But privately, he'd become the silent partner in a dozen ventures across Eastern Europe, casinos, fuel exports, even arms dealing. Smirnov compiled everything, names, accounts, offshore links. It was a map of corruption, but he couldn't go to the police, not anymore. Instead, he went to someone else, the widow of Dmitriev. She had stayed silent all these years, hidden with her son in Estonia. She met Smirnov at a border cafe, eyes sharp despite the fatigue. "They tried to find us," she said. "I've seen Ryazanov twice. He watches from a distance, like he's daring me to speak." Smirnov handed her the file, everything he had. "You need to take this outside the country. Someone has to know." She nodded, took the papers, hugged him, then disappeared. But Anna Dmitrieva didn't disappear to hide. She went underground to fight. Back in Tallinn, she began sorting through everything. Smirnov's files were explosive, yes, but they weren't everything. Anna had kept her own secrets. Secrets even her husband hadn't known. She had been Vikord's silent archivist. When she realized they were being watched in 1994, she began copying everything. Bank statements, contracts, internal memos, even letters from Saeed to unnamed Kremlin officials. She stored them on floppies at first, later on USBs. Some were hidden in her son's toys, others mailed to an old friend in Helsinki. She never looked at them. She just preserved them for a time like this. Now, with Smirnov's intel as a map, she began assembling a fuller picture. There were more companies, more proxies, and names she recognized from the headlines: ministers, media owners, even a judge now serving in Strasbourg. Anna reached out to an old acquaintance, Mart, a Baltic journalist once blacklisted in Moscow. He still carried a recorder in his coat pocket and wore the same threadbare coat he'd had in '91. But he was smart, fearless, and had a direct line to the European press. Mart was skeptical until he saw the documents. "This is nuclear," he whispered. "Not just business. This is a network." "Then expose it," Anna said. Mart worked fast. He set up dead drops, air-gapped laptops, and secure backups across Sweden, Finland, and Germany. He knew the storm was coming, but he also knew the truth was bigger than the risk. While he wrote, Anna moved again. Her flat in Tallinn was too exposed. She took a ferry to Helsinki, met with her contact, retrieved the backups she'd mailed 11 years ago. They were intact. One image stood out: a handshake between Saeed and Ryazanov in a dacha garden. In the background, a young Dmitriev, smiling uncomfortably. She sent it to Mart. He didn't reply for hours. When he did, it was a single line. They were all in it, from the beginning. The story dropped a week later. Russian widow uncovers hidden empire of corruption, links former KGB assets to Western banks. The fallout was immediate. Interpol reopened sealed investigations. Deutsche Bank froze over 30 accounts. And Ryazanov? He disappeared. But not everyone celebrated. Anna began receiving encrypted threats. Her email was hacked. And one morning, the tires on her rental car were slashed. She didn't panic. She packed. Mart offered her refuge, but she declined. "This isn't your fight," she said. "It is now," he replied. They moved together, first to Riga, then to Warsaw. Along the way, they kept publishing. Each file, each story, each name. Until finally, one landed harder than all the rest. A leaked memo from 1993, signed by a now-deceased general. It confirmed everything. Vikord had been a front for weapons trafficking and covert finance, protected by both Russian and Western interests. The memo was meant to be destroyed. Anna had kept a copy, and now the world knew. But so did Said. In a cafe in Zurich, he looked at the headline. He didn't speak. He just nodded, then picked up his phone. She made her move. The voice on the other end answered, "Then it's time we make ours." And just like that, the silence shattered again. The news spread like wildfire, but the woman behind it moved like a ghost. Anna changed SIM cards every 2 days. She never stayed more than one night in the same hotel. Even Mart didn't always know where she was, but Said knew. Zurich was cold that October, the kind of chill that seeped through your clothes and into your bones. Said sat in a private booth at a corner cafe just off Bahnhofstrasse. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, and sipped tea as if nothing had changed. But the way his eyes tracked the room said otherwise. Across from him sat a man with gray temples and a diplomat's posture. He wasn't smiling. "You assured us she was neutralized." Said gave a small nod. "She was quiet until Smirnov. Smirnov is dead. But not his work. She has it, and more." The man tapped his finger on the newspaper headline. The ink was still fresh. "You need to handle this, quietly." "We have a team en route to Warsaw," Said replied. "They know what to do." The man stood. "See that they do, or it won't just be her blood on your hands." Said didn't watch him leave. He simply took another sip of tea. Meanwhile, in Warsaw, Anna and Mart had relocated to a nondescript apartment near Praga district. The curtains stayed drawn. They communicated by burner phones and handwritten notes. Mart never brought his laptop inside. "They're coming," Anna said one night, staring out at the empty street. "I can feel it." "Then we give them a reason to rush." Mart handed her a flash drive. "Last piece, the Cyprus files. They link Vikord to 2 sitting ministers in Brussels." Anna closed her eyes. She was tired, but not broken. "Do it." The next morning, the files went live. BuzzFeed Europe, Der Spiegel, Medusa. Within hours, the story had reached 3 continents, and with it, pressure. Political inquiries, parliamentary debates, legal summonses. But the wolves didn't retreat. They got closer. On the 3rd night, someone knocked on the apartment door. 3 short taps. Mart looked at Anna. She reached into her bag and handed him a revolver. "You answer." He opened the door slowly. It was a girl. 16, maybe 17, eyes wide, pale. "They're in the building," she whispered. "They paid my brother to let them in. You have 10 minutes. They didn't wait. Within 3 minutes, they were out the back door, down the fire escape, into a cab Anna had paid in advance. Mart burned the remaining papers in a dumpster as they drove away. "Where now?" he asked. "South." They crossed into Slovakia by dawn. In Zurich, Said received a message. Target left Warsaw. Possible route. Austria. He frowned. "They're running." He looked across the room to a woman with a tablet. She nodded. "Shall I escalate?" "Not yet. Let them think they're safe." But Anna knew she never would be, and she accepted that. She and Mart found shelter in a monastery-turned hostel in the Slovak hills. Cold stone walls, no Wi-Fi, no visitors. For a week, they worked in silence, organizing the next leak. The one that would change everything. The names of American consultants, CIA-linked banks, one European monarch. Mart shook his head. If this goes out, it has to. He didn't argue. On the 10th night, Anna stood outside beneath the stars. Snow was starting to fall. She clutched a flash drive in her gloved hand and whispered to no one, "This is for you, Sasha." In Zurich, Said got the ping. Transfer detected. Bratislava node. He didn't smile. "We're out of time," he said. The hunt had become a war, and now both sides were ready to bleed. Bratislava was quiet in winter. The Danube moved slow and wide, reflecting dim lights from the embankment like a river of secrets. Beneath a decommissioned freight terminal, Anna and Mart hunched over a fold-out table, cold air biting at their fingers as they worked by battery-powered lamps. Mart finished wiring the backup drive to a cellular kill switch. "If they take us," he said, "this uploads everything. Full archive, no redactions, no waiting." Anna looked at him, her face pale and drawn but resolute. "We need one more route. If I don't make it, the story has to survive." They moved again, this time to a contact in Budapest. A Polish exile, a code writer who owed Mart from a war zone leak years ago. He had a secure node hidden in the back of an abandoned theater, but the net was closing. Interpol had flagged 3 shell accounts traced to Vikord's legacy. 2 of them were now frozen. The third had vanished into a bank in Luxembourg. Behind the scenes, Said had reappeared, this time not in Zurich, but in Istanbul, meeting with an old FSB fixer named Krylov. "She has the files," Krylov muttered over Turkish tea, "but she's not the problem." Said raised an eyebrow. "Who is?" Krylov leaned forward. "Her dead friend, Dmitriev. He built a failsafe." Said froze. The plan had always been to eliminate Dmitriev, clean out Vikord, and launder the spoils through dummy corporations before the Germans noticed the contracts were fake. But if Dmitriev had left behind a digital testament, or worse, a full trail, the whole operation would become radioactive. "Find the backup," Said growled. "I want every server in that network bled dry." But time was against them. Anna had passed the final fragment to a Norwegian freelance reporter. No name, no face, just a drop location and a 6-digit PIN. From there, the story began surfacing in pieces. One file in The Guardian, another in an encrypted leak channel monitored by NATO, a photograph of Said shaking hands with a former intelligence minister, a voice recording of Krylov discussing asset termination. In Budapest, Mart was losing sleep. He was coughing blood. The stress was turning his hands shaky. "You need to go," he told Anna one morning, his voice hoarse. "It's me they're tracking now. I'll stay behind." Anna stared at him. "No. You always knew it would end like this." She walked away. Not because she agreed, but because she had to. That night, Mart left the safe house and walked into the dark, holding a decoy drive and a fake passport. 10 blocks later, he was gone. No body, no trace. Said didn't care. He needed Anna, and she was still moving. She crossed into Romania disguised as a student, then into Bulgaria under the ID of a Red Cross nurse. Along the way, she handed out fragments. One to a priest, one to a DJ, one to a drunk woman on a train with instructions scribbled on the back of a cigarette box. In Sofia, a blogger posted an article called "The Billion-Dollar Corpse," detailing the hidden wealth of the Vikord network and hinting at connections to current Eastern European leadership. The post vanished within hours, but not before screenshots flooded Telegram. Meanwhile, the FSB began clearing house. 2 mid-level operatives vanished from Moscow. A banker in Rostov fell from his balcony. A server farm in Kaliningrad caught fire. Panic had begun. Anna knew what this meant. She had moved the line from vengeance to sabotage. The system was eating itself. She just had to stay alive long enough to watch. But then, something unexpected. On a rainy Thursday in Bucharest, a package was delivered to a news desk at TVR, the national television station. No return address. Inside, a VHS tape, a printed note, and a faded photograph of Dmitriev. The note read, "This is not the end. This is the receipt." The tape showed Dmitriev, years before his murder, seated in a dark room. He was speaking directly to camera. "If this is being played, I am dead. But I was not alone, and neither are you." He named names. He listed dates. He mentioned Said. And most explosively, he detailed a secret transfer of funds between Vikord and a firm registered in the US under the guise of a religious charity. The tape aired during the 9 p.m. broadcast. Within hours, Russia denied everything. Turkey issued no comment. And the FBI issued a quiet subpoena to a Delaware shell company called Path of Light. But Anna didn't smile. She was on a boat by then, crossing the Adriatic under an assumed name, surrounded by strangers who had no idea they were seated beside a living weapon. At 3:12 a.m., her final trigger activated. Every file, every video, every timestamp, all public. The dead man's switch had fired, and in a penthouse in Monaco, Said stood at his window, watching the sunrise over the Mediterranean, and realized there was no one left to trust, not even the shadows. Don't scroll past. Hit like and subscribe if you're ready for the next twisted story.